G'day YouTubers, it's nice to see you again. Okay, today's topic's going to be about Jesus. Bit of a religious theme today. Sacrificial lamb or the proverbial pain in Rome's butt. It's my opinions and nobody else's. Whether positive or negative, what you think about the subject today and the subject material, that's entirely up to you to leave comments. Anyway, getting on today. Where do you start with a subject like Jesus? Now, most people would start at the beginning, the birth, 25th of December, year 0001. Except that wasn't when Jesus was born. Jesus was actually born as the Jesus that we know him 350 to 400 years later, in the 4th or 5th century AD. And we have this gentleman here, Jerome, Father Jerome, commissioned by this gentleman right here, Pope Damasus, to go out and find every bit of literature, every scripture, every bit of evidence he can to prove whether or not Jesus was real or not, for their own purpose. And the purpose was to control Europe, control the masses. But they needed something, they needed a martyr, they needed somebody to lead the cause. And of course that fell upon Jesus. So in 382, Damasus I commissioned Father Jerome to go to the Holy Lands and to scour all of Judea, Syria, Palestine, and to get as much scripture as he can about Jesus, who he was and what he was about. Because at that time he wasn't really considered to be the head of the church, the martyr. He was just a normal man. So, now the problem with Father Jerome's version of the Bible, which was the very first Bible, known as the Vulgate translations, was that anything that showed the church to be in bad light or contradicting the church preachings, those transcripts were destroyed, which was a real shame. And basically what the church wanted was to control the masses. The masses were stupid in the fact that they couldn't read, they couldn't write. Anybody needed to sign a name, they just put an X marks the spot. And they controlled the masses that way. If you didn't do what the church told you, you'd be in disfavour with God. God would then read down vengeance on you. Your crops will fail, you become ill and you'll die, and you won't go to heaven, you'll end up in hell. And that's the scaremongering the church needed, and that's why they commissioned Jerome to find a figurehead, to someone to blame other than the church. And God and Jesus were the ones going to be blamed for this, that and everything else. All the plagues on earth were caused by God's displeasement, because we didn't do what God asked. We were rained upon by these plagues of locusts and blight and basically everything under the sun. It was God's vengeance on the masses because they weren't doing things the church had told them to do. And that's basically what the Vulgate translations were for. Scaremongering. If you didn't do as you're told, you go to hell. Burn for eternity in hell and damnation. Fire and brimstone. The beast, 666. You'll be cast into the pit with the beast for 1,000 years. And it worked. People went to church, they left their offerings. what little money they had, they gave it to the church. The church became richer, the people became poorer. The church became rich landowners, rented the land out to the poor people paid the monks in church, they also paid the rent for the land. They had to set aside 2 days of their own time to plough the monks' land and work the monks' land, which meant that 2 days wasn't going on their land. And then when they had a poor harvest, it was, oh, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, and God's displeased with you and all that sort of things. But basically you get the understanding, you get the drift of what the Vulgate translations was for. Now, so that took up to 400 AD. So from 382 to 400 AD, Father Jerome was writing the first ever Bible, the Universal Bible adopted by the Church of Rome to control the masses. And it was absolute truth. So we're going to take that absolute truth and we're going to go along their timeline and we're going to disprove, in my opinion, that what's written in the Bible is just that, fiction. It's a fictional book with a heroine, which is Jesus, who became a literary martyr and head of the church as we know him today. Now, Luke wrote in his gospel that Joseph and Mary had to go to Bethlehem, to Joseph's birthplace, and register the census. There was a census that year, but it's not clear what year it was. But Luke says it was in the reign of Herod the Good, or Herod the Great. Sorry, my apologies, Herod the Great. Now Herod the Great died. I think it was the 11th of November. 11th of November 4 BC. So Joseph had to have gone to Bethlehem not after the 11th of November 4 BC, before Common Era. So for Jesus to have been born on 25th of December 0001, year 1 of the 1st century, he couldn't have been born in Herod's lifetime. It would have had to have been after. But we're going by the church's claim that the Bible is absolute truth. It is the gospel. It is the correct, absolute, unequivocal account of Jesus' existence. So we are holding him to it. And so far the timelines don't match up. There was a census in 4 BC, the Quinius census, where Rome wanted to know exactly what they had wealth-wise, land, properties, people, who they controlled, where they controlled it. That was the idea of census. Now, second discrepancy is that when Mary and Joseph arrived in Bethlehem, they were knocking on the doors of the inns. Do you have any room with me? That doesn't sound right to me. See, a manger to a Jew back in 1st or 4 BC was a cellar. And that's what a manger was. It was a cellar. And this is where Jerome's version starts to crack up, because he's literally taking words that he's read and catching them, well, not catching them, what's the word that you'd use? He's interpreting them to what his language, his Latin, would interpret to be, not what the Jewish Hebrew would interpret to be. So a manger is a cellar. Now, having to go from inn to inn doesn't ring true either. Bearing in mind, Bethlehem, Joseph's birthplace. He would have had family in Bethlehem still. He would have had a lot of family in Bethlehem because they believed in big families. They wanted as many children as they could get because the sons were the workforce. If they had more sons, they had a bigger workforce. The fields, then the crops, then the livestock. If they had daughters, then those daughters were married off, traded like slaves to someone who's going to pay the biggest amount of dowry. So they had big families. They weren't one child families. Women were married for one thing, to bear sons. So he would have had relatives in Bethlehem and he would have stayed with them. He wouldn't have trudged the streets for hours on end trying to find a place for him and Mary to lay their head and have the baby child. They would have had Jesus in a manger, which is the cellar of one of their relatives. That's basically the discrepancies regarding Jesus' birth. Now, the 25th of December. Now, see, everybody celebrates Christmas Day as the 25th of December and Jesus' birthday. So I have problems with that as well. That's my opinion is strongly torn to that. There's the fact that when Rome or Augustus, Emperor Augustus, adopted the Christian faith, where they moved from paganism to Christianity, they needed a special day, their holiest day of days. And they had a date which was the 25th of December, which was their date that they celebrated the sun god, Sol. And they adopted that date to be their religious date when the whole of Rome, not just part of Rome, the whole of Rome adopted under Augustus's command that everybody would worship Christianity on the 25th of December. And that's where the 25th of December comes from. Not that it was Jesus' birthday. So that's another inconsistency. Excuse me. Got a bit of a cold, so I might cough now and then. But hopefully it won't be too inconveniencing. So, what do we establish? We've established that Jesus didn't become head of the church until nearly 400 years later. And we discovered through the timelines that Jesus wasn't born on the 25th of December 0001 of the first century, but in 4 BC, before Common Era. And Jesus wasn't born in a stable. He was born in a manger, which is a cellar. And Joseph and Mary took refuge in a relative's house because he would have had relatives in Bethlehem. It was his hometown, his birthplace. And families do not move far in those days through research. They stayed where they were born. Joseph moved to Nazareth, which was roughly around about 80 miles from Bethlehem to Jordan. and the Sea of Galilee and Nazareth, where Joseph was. Itchy ear there, sorry about that. And Joseph was a farmer. He had land, he grew crops, and he was a shepherd. He had sheep, and he was occasionally skilled carpenter. But skilled carpenter wasn't his main profession. He was a carpenter, but he was a farmer, because Nazareth was a farming village. And you go with what's popular. If the village was a farming village, you became farmers, because that's what they did. If it was a shepherd's village, then you raised sheep and nothing but sheep, or goats, or cattle, and you wouldn't farm. But they were a farming village, so they were working. Wind me up, this one does. It literally does. Jesus was born through the Immaculate Conception of Mary to God. If Mary had ever announced that she conceived through the Holy Spirit, she would have been put to death straight away, because that was the punishment for blasphemy against God. And the church would have seen that against Mary as a blasphemous. She would have been put to death straight away, regardless of how Joseph would have hummed and hawed and moaned about it. They would never have allowed her to do that and get away with it. That would have undermined their belief in God being powerful and almighty. And why would they choose this woman to be the bearer of God's child? That wouldn't have worn, and it doesn't wear with me either. She would have been put to death, bearing in mind that Moses was supposed to have brought 10 commandments down from Mount Ararat. And out of those 10 commandments, at the time of Jesus' birth, 4 BC, now there's over 4,000 years has passed, there was the equivalent of 625 laws from those 10 commandments. And 90% of those laws were punishable by death. If you lit a fire on Sunday, the Sabbath day, you were put to death because you chose to work on the Sabbath. Now, so the Immaculate Conception doesn't wear with me, but that's my opinion. That is truly my opinion, only my opinion, because of where I've researched the customs of what it was like to live in those times, who controlled what, when and where. Rome controlled Jordan, Palestine, Syria. They came in and they conquered. They didn't come in, knock on the door, say, hello, we'd like to occupy your land. They came in with swords and they were brutal about it. And they reigned for 500 plus years. They ruled Syria. Now, they was taught Jesus was saying or claiming to be the Son of God. Again, the Son of God was another expression or wordage that Jerome had got wrong. So he assumed that where Jesus was claiming to be the Son of God, that it fell in line with the Holy Conception, the conception of the Holy Spirit and all that sort of thing. But the problem is that to the Jews, being the Son of God means that you are King of Israel. And that's what it was meant as. Jacob, Ishmael, I've forgotten their names now. Let's think of some names. Samuel, David, Abraham, Isaac. All the old leaders of the tribes of Israel were sons of God. They were the kings of Israel. So therefore they were, according to Jewish faith, the sons of God. They were chosen by God to rule over Israel. And that's where the expression came from. But good old Jerome got it wrong, feeling that he was claiming to be the Son of God, so therefore he must have been the Son of God. He must have been sent down by God to save our souls and everything else, la-di-la-di-la, and all that sort of crap that we have been brought up to believe over centuries and centuries and centuries of brainwashing, that Jesus was the Son of God. So that didn't wash with me at all. And let's move on. So there's not pretty much more to say about Jesus being the Son, apart from the fact that if Jesus was claiming to be the Son of God, then again you've got to look at the Bible. And the Bible gave out the lineage of who was in line for the throne of God, who was the kings of Israel. And Jesus, it showed in the Bible, it showed that Jesus was in line through Joseph's side of the family to be a possible contender of the throne. Now, Herod the Great was put into power by Rome as a caretaker monarch to keep control over the Jews, because the Romans didn't want to have to worry about the Jews. As long as they fell in line, didn't cause any ripples in the pond, they were quite happy. King Herod, you can rule the place. You'll be our caretaker boss. You answer to us, and they answer to you. And that was how it was. Now, with this claim that Jesus was supposed to have said that he was the King of God, and when he was put on trial and Pontius Pilate asked him, are you the Son of God? And Jesus refused to answer. And he was making a claim at the throne of Israel, not that he was the Son of God. He was making a claim that his lineage meant that he should be the King of God, the Son of God. Well, I keep saying the King of God, I don't know. The Son of God. He should have been the Son of God. It was his birthright to wear the crown of Israel. So he was a threat to Rome, a threat to the church, and more importantly, a threat to Herod. Herod didn't like that. Herod captured his cousin, John the Baptist, who, again, according to the Bible, didn't know Jesus, but they were cousins. Because Mary, sister Elizabeth, gave birth to John the Baptist. Now they would have met many, 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 many times over the course of Jesus' lifetime. So, John the Baptist, head lopped off, Jesus went off, upset, as you would if a member of your family had been killed. You would go off, which he did, because then he was supposed to have come back and walked on water and everything else. And we'll get to the miracles in a minute. They're my biggest thieves, that's my biggest opinionated thing, that is. Okay, so where are we now? Yes, Jesus claiming to be the Son of God, not because he felt that God was his father, but because he was in line for the throne and should have been placed in the throne. Or it should have been Joseph, his father, should have been the king of Israel, and then he should have then inherited the throne of Israel. And he would have been the Son of God. in accordance to the Jews' understanding of the Word, the Son of God, being anointed by God to sit on the throne of Israel, not born as the Son of God through the Immaculate Conception. Now, where are we up to now? Well, the old miracles. Oh, I love this part. The old miracles. Jesus was supposed to have brought people back to life, cured the sick, fed the hungry. Basically, what a load of crap. But again, the church, Jerome using his poetic license, his writing skills, beef up who Jesus was. You see, again, we were led to believe that Jesus was the Son of God, the Holy Messiah, our Saviour. He come to us to save our souls, and he sacrificed himself to save our souls. Crap. Really is crap. The fact that Jesus did not commit any miracles. If you look at it this way, if Jesus had committed any miracles, Pontius Pilate would have known about it straight away. And Pontius Pilate, bearing in mind that Rome was built on power. If you had the power, you controlled Rome. You controlled the world. Because Rome had conquered 90% of the world. So power was the key to success in Rome. If you had power, you had wealth. And you imagine that if this man, this Jesus, hungry, bringing people back to life, do you honestly think that Pontius Pilate would have passed up the opportunity of presenting a man to Caesar, a man who could bring his soldiers back to life after a battle, who could feed his armies with mere loaves of bread and a few fish? Do you honestly think that if Pontius Pilate had known about those miracles, he wouldn't have crucified him? He would have captured him, taken him to Rome and presented him to Caesar. So, as far as the feeding of the 5,000 and the 4,000 and bringing the soldier's daughter back to life and Lazarus back to life and curing the lame and the mad, that sort of thing would have ended up in front of Pontius Pilate at his feet, because that amount of people would not have been able to keep it quiet. He would have known about it, and believe me, he knew quite a lot about what was going on. So the miracles didn't happen. But of course, Jerome had to beef it up. He had to include the miracles simply because he had to beef who Jesus was. He had to give him special powers. Pretty much the same as where Spider-Man's got special powers and Superman's got special powers. Jesus had to have special powers. And his powers was bringing people, curing people, feeding people. So, doesn't wash with me. Now, the purging of Jesus was done on Rome's authority, on Pontius Pilate's authority, as a deterrent It wasn't done simply because it was deemed to be normal practice. It was done as a deterrent. You mess around with Rome, we're going to mess around with you, and this is what happens. And he was flayed, flogged, beaten to an inch of his life, but enough life for him to be crucified. So for Pontius Pilate to wash his hands of Jesus and say, "You sort it out," wouldn't have happened. Rome killed Jesus because he was making a claim for the throne of Israel. The church wanted Jesus dead because he is trying to start up a new religious faction within the Jewish church. Hence why there was the religious side to Jesus, and why he became head of the church, because of what he was preaching. And Herod was quite happy to see him dead, because then that cut away the lineage as to who was in line for the throne. I think they pretty much knew that Jesus was the bravest of the family, and that's why he went after the throne of Israel. Not to sit by the side of God. Nobody sits by the side of God. I mean, that's another story. That's another debate. So, that's basically why he was killed. He was killed because he was a threat to Rome. Not because of his religious beliefs. Rome couldn't care less about their religious beliefs. The church could, because he was taking people away from the church. Take people away from the church, telling them that they could pray in their own homes, pray in the fields. They didn't have to go to church, they didn't have to pay homage. That would have bankrupted the church, the Jewish church, the synagogues, the temples. That would have bankrupted the chief priests, Caiaphas, and all the others. So they had a vested interest in seeing him gone. And the way that the Romans were killing or executing, I wouldn't say killing, executing, was crucifixion. Now, a lot of people weren't crucified on a cross. They were crucified on olive trees. And there's archaeological evidence to prove that to be fact. They had these olive trees on the Mount of Olives, and they just hammered them to the trees until they died. As far as the crucifixion of Jesus, again, literary license by Father Jerome to exaggerate the crucifixion to benefit the church. That Jesus would have been in excruciating pain, and he would have taken about four hours to die on crucifixion. Now, whether or not he was placed on a cross, or whether he was crucified on an olive tree, that's pure speculation. Bearing in mind that nobody was there to witness it, because they'd all scarpered all his disciples, all his followers, who probably became followers because he promised them wealth and land if he got his crown back from Rome. So they wasn't following him because of his religious beliefs. They were Jews as well. He was born a Jew, lived a Jew, died a Jew. And so did his disciples. Christianity didn't come into effect until well into the 2nd, 3rd century. Now, that's basically my opinion on Jesus. He was not a sacrificial lamb, but he was a proverbial pain in Rome's butt. He was a troublemaker who was trying to get his birthright, the throne of Israel, back in his lineage through Joseph. Rome didn't like it, they killed him. Squashed the uprising. But it wouldn't have been that much of an uprising. After all, if we go by the Bible, he only had 12 disciples, 12 followers. And they soon scattered as soon as he was arrested. So that's my opinion. That's what I believe happens. Now it's up to you whether or not you believe it, or whether or not it's your opinion that I'm totally wrong, and I'm going to burn in hell and damnation. Well, I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, stay safe and happy.